Welcome back! I'm Tyler, you're watching the channel that has my fracking name on it, and welcome to another installment of I'm Telling Tyler, our write-in show where you can ask me questions, tell me the latest tea, and so long as it's at least Lolita adjacent, you can send your tea and or queries to imtellingtyler@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get right down to our first submission from Violet. And Violet says, Dear Tyler, first and foremost, let's get the pleasantries out of the way. Pronouns, her/she for both parties. Nickname for myself, Violet. Nickname for the other party, you can use your imagination. There's a woman in my community that I can't quite figure out. We have spent time together in a very tiny meetup and she is perfectly pleasant. However, when I interact with her or watch her interact with others at a larger meetup of 4 or more people, she can be insufferable. She dominates the conversation, talks over people, and refuses to listen to anything you have to say. Even when she asks you a question such as, do you like X, she will barely let you get in a quick yes or no before giving her own opinion on the subject she asked you about before quickly changing the subject. I have seen her also butt into conversations between 2 or 3 people, dominate it, and then turns to another group and repeats. At our last meetup, I got the impression as if we were all members in her royal court, that we were supposed to hang on her every word, and the meetup was somehow in celebration of her and not something for all of us to enjoy. She basically ignored everyone and just addressed the group with conversation topics she wanted to talk about. The topics she would bring up are ones she can brag about this, that, and the other thing that she has or has done. Every conversation she has is about her in every capacity, her experiences, and her opinions. She allows no one to get in edgewise. If other people were having a more private conversation, she would drag them into the group conversation she was controlling. If she wasn't dominating the conversation, she was playing on her phone, taking selfies, or fixing her makeup. She is definitely the self-appointed queen bee of our community. I keep wanting to give her the benefit of the doubt because that's just who I am. Because I have had nice interactions with her under very specific circumstances, but I'm not sure how much more I can give. What do you think I should do? Thank you so much, and I hope you are doing well. Sincerely, Violet. Well, Violet, it seems like you have quite the loudmouth on your hands. In fact, I think that's the nickname we're going to go with. And real quick, just so none of the details get lost in the shuffle, if we were to boil what you're asking for advice on down into one sentence, you are dealing with a woman who is tolerable in small groups, but in larger numbers tends to suck the air out of the room like an aesthetically adorned black hole. I feel like most people have met at least one loudmouth in their lives, and I will agree with you that it can be an incredibly vexing experience. However, I have found that there is quite the easy solution to this experience, and that is quite simply to acknowledge that Blabbermouth has interrupted and then continue the conversation you were having before. And the acknowledgement can go as simply as, I understand that you were excited about blank, but we are currently talking about this. Your refusal to redirect the conversation at their beck and call should trip them up for a moment and allow you time to keep talking about whatever it is you were chatting about before. It will be a good lesson for Motormouth that that type of behavior is not acceptable, and should Motormouth persist in this behavior after you have already redirected them politely, all you need to do is rinse and repeat, again as politely as possible, while gently but firmly redirecting the conversation to where it was pre-interruption. I have found that with enough cycles of this, that the Motormouth either gives up on controlling the conversation or finds another room to suck the oxygen out of. And while I know that even this very soft form of confrontation can be uncomfortable for some people, I like to hope that it will help to know that the Motormouth is the one displaying incredibly poor manners, and your interrupting their uninvited soliloquy is in fact an act of public service for anyone who isn't hearing impaired. And even with the discomfort of the people having to listen to them rattle on aside, the longer they're allowed to act like this with no one giving them a heads up that they're being obnoxious, the more likely they are to shrink their prospects of making any actual friends in the community. So you're actually doing them a service too. This is presuming that they just lack the social skills to understand that what they're doing is incredibly annoying, and not assuming that you were dealing with someone who's just absolutely obsessed with themselves to the point of no return. Such a person would need a much more firm style of handling, and if I were to give you advice on that, I would say that every time they interrupt you, you need to look them in the eye, inform them that they have interrupted you, and then continue speaking to the person you were speaking to before. This is a much more direct version of the strategy you would use on the person who just lacked social skills and didn't understand that their interruptions were disrupting the flow of conversation. Because if you really are dealing with someone who is so obsessed with themselves that they don't give a rat's ass what anyone else is saying, it is much more effective to assert early on that that type of behavior is going to get them nowhere. This is much the same training as you would use on a small child, and should you be dealing with the self-obsessed instead of just socially awkward, you will find they may pitch the same type of tantrum. This is why it is, again, incredibly important to always remain polite. Do not engage with the person pitching a fit. That type of individual desperately wants the attention, and you are better off either continuing your conversation as if a full-fledged adult is not losing their shit, or removing you and your conversational partners from the location, thus distancing yourself from the spectacle and not feeding into it. And while I know speaking up in any capacity can be scary at first, I can absolutely assure you the rest of the community will be glad you did. So in summary, if you're dealing with someone who's just socially awkward, gentle acknowledgement of their interruption and then redirection to what you were talking about before is really all it takes. And contrastingly, if you're dealing with someone who is self-obsessed, you need the much more firm version, gray rock their interruptions, and politely but assertively turn the conversation back to where it was before. You keep this up long enough with the appropriate amount of social niceties, and the Motormouth will either shut their trap or move on to softer targets. I hope this advice helps you, Violet, or anyone else who's dealing with someone who's particularly long-winded. And moving on to our next question, our next submission is from Carrot Cake. And Carrot Cake says, "Hi Tyler, here's my convention horror story circa 2015. I was 14 and a sophomore in high school, and it was my first convention wearing Lolita, though I had been to this particular one before once in 7th grade. I will not name names, but it's quite popular. This convention center has 2 floors, so they would give the lower floor to the anime convention and the upper floor to, drumroll, a porn convention. And yes, they still do this, and the dates for both always overlap. We all know where this is going. So off I go to the con, leaving my dad in the hotel room because I didn't want him cramping my style and he didn't want to be seen in public with this frilly disappointment, and the morning actually went okay. Then I decided to go to the unnamed coffee chain store inside the convention center for an overly sugared dose of barely coffee. I get in line and there's a mixed audience from both cons here. No big deal, everyone has clothes on and no one is pushing kinks in anyone else's faces, but then I notice in front of me, Creepy Man. Creepy Man is 2 people ahead of me and talking to 2 girls/women from the anime convention. He hands them a card and says to contact him later, and they seem overjoyed. They leave, and he suddenly turns and sees yours truly, and immediately goes, "Oh, you do age play? Fantastic!" I panic, instantly shoving words out of my mouth about being here for anime and that I'm wearing my normal clothes, when he comes up and puts a hand on my shoulder, telling me that I would be perfect for a new film he's working on, and that he can make me famous. I reiterate that I am not interested, wearing a fashion and not into that stuff, and that I'm 14, hoping it was an honest mistake that he didn't hear me the first time. It wasn't. He hands me a business card and tells me that's okay and to call him when I turn 18. How I didn't manage to cry or beat him with my parasol, I do not know. Creepy Man then vanishes upstairs to PornCon, leaving me mildly shaking and sucking down my coffee abomination as fast as humanly possible. After that, I didn't even stay the rest of the con. I ran back to my room and hid there the rest of the weekend. I graduate college next year, and as much as I want to, I have not been to another con since and rarely go to meetups when I'm back home for fear of another encounter like this. I know you're the Salt Queen, but do you have any words of advice or encouragement for getting back into the con scene, whether at this same area or at a con closer to my college? Thank you, Carrot Cake. Real quick, because I think we can all agree that that was a lot, and I'd like to buy time for my sanity with a summary. What you essentially experienced was you were 14 and attended an anime convention that was sharing building space with a gathering of adult film artists and their fans. You ran into one of said adult film artists in a coffee shop. He invaded your personal space, mistook what you were wearing for age play, and even after being informed that you were a 14-year-old child, he promptly offered you work as an accountant, a smurf worker, if you will, and told you to call him the moment you turned 18 before promptly disappearing as if he hadn't just skirted an entire prison sentence. I would like to talk with the person who decided that an event that attracts a lot of minors should share space with an industry infamous for preying on them. And while I will acknowledge here and now that being an accountant is a real job and should be respected, I think in this instance that we can all agree that this specific line of work has no business being anywhere near the fracking children. All that said, and to put that very touchy subject aside for a moment to address the question you actually asked, Carrot Cake, after that very predatory and honestly kind of traumatizing incident that has kept you away from cons and meetups, you've told us that you're graduating college next year and you haven't been to a convention since you were 14. Because you're afraid of having another encounter like what happened in that coffee shop. And finally, you seem to want words of advice on how to enjoy the fashion again and to get back into the con scene. While I am obviously not professionally trained in being solicited by the worst of humanity as a child in a place that should have been safe and fun, I think the first step in allowing yourself to progress past this incredibly unpleasant, uncomfortable, and frankly kind of scary incident is to acknowledge that in the scheme of things, if running into bloated perverts in coffee shops were based on a lottery system, you would have won the Powerball. The circumstances of the clusterfuck that occurred when you were 14 were cooked up by some incredibly unlikely ingredients, and while it pains my brain to think about teenagers running around in the same building with people who will later use teen as a search term, it should comfort you to know that that particular cocktail of people was primarily made possible by incredibly poor planning. Either the owner of the venue or the people in charge of the dates for these conventions spend most of their time concussed, or you were subjected to the unfortunate fallout when human apathy meets stupidity. Either way, it is not every day that a spicy film worker propositions a 14-year-old in a coffee shop. This is generally considered a fast track to getting arrested. And while I do not know where you live and am not an expert on your state's laws, I'm pretty sure him knowingly giving a minor his card is some kind of crime. It sounds real close to the solicitation of a minor to me, and I definitely cannot think of any reasons for him giving you his contact information outside of things that will send him to prison. So I can assure you, outside of that one very specific instance that understandably scarred you for life, this type of experience is not a common occurrence. However, all that said, I know that the trauma you experienced isn't going to be flipped off like a light switch just because I told you that what occurred isn't likely to happen again. And considering you've told us that you're about to graduate college, you likely already know this. So rather than just leaning on how unlikely it is to experience something this beyond the pale again, I'm hoping to give you some actionable advice on how to re-enter the con scene and enjoy Lolita fashion to its fullest. Understanding the ridiculous odds and circumstances of what occurred to you is one part and is important, but after that, it's even more important to make a plan to reclaim your passions and restore your comfort level. And the first thing I would recommend you do is use what's at your disposal. This is a role best filled by friends or family members that you trust, and these are the people that you're going to take with you when you either attend Lolita meetups or return to attending anime conventions. Safety in numbers is a thing the lizard brain tends to like. This is usually one of the upsides of a Lolita meetup, and while your friend or family member might not wear Lolita, so long as you quickly run it by the organizer, most hosts are not going to care, and in fact will probably be thrilled that there's another person to hold a camera. Mind you, bringing a non-Lolita guest are best done at meetups that are not seat limited, but for events where your +1 will not be taking up space that could have been filled by a frilly person, having the built-in comfort of someone you already know and trust as you slowly get back into the scene should give you a baseline of security to fall back on as you build up positive experiences to overwrite the negative. I would suggest this exact same strategy when it comes to anime conventions, and even better if you know that the local Lolita community is attending, because then you can join their ranks and bust through the dealer's hall like a frilly battering ram. That said, given that I do not know your current personal or social life, to address the possibility that you or someone who identifies with your story doesn't have anyone that they can take with them to meetups or anime conventions, this makes things a little more difficult than if you had that social support built in, but all that means is that you need to do a little work to build it yourself. Lolitas are incredibly fortunate to have a very active online community. You specifically expressed that you have a local community yourself, and in the event that you do not have a trusted friend or family member to help you slowly acclimate to being active in the fashion and the con scene again, it is at this point that I would highly suggest you take advantage of the incredibly active online Lolita community to make connections with people who share your interests both locally and internationally, and giving yourself the comfort of knowing that you are not alone in either the love of this fashion or experiencing some occasionally strange things while wearing it. I would advise you, Carrot Cake, if you do not have someone to go with you to a Lolita meetup or an anime convention, that you get in touch with whatever community you're intending to be active in, and that you get to know a few people online and attend a Lolita meetup where you know they will be there. Going out in a group of Lolitas will usually keep any one member from being singled out because Lolitas do not put up with that shit, and continuing to slowly expand your comfort level in these groups of people will eventually allow you to make friendships that will provide the comfort you need to feel more secure at a larger gathering like an anime convention. It will also make the convention more fun than wandering around on your own, and if you give yourself the amount of time and patience you deserve to work through this trauma, I think you will come out the other side with the Lolita life that you actually deserve. The fun and joy that comes with participating in this fashion that you should have had all along. And while I know that no part of this is going to be particularly easy, especially initially, I honestly believe that it takes guts to wear this fashion. It takes a certain something to look this far outside the norm, and I believe in that same strength that got you started in the first place, and that you will use it to take back your happiness and comfort in public spaces. The same way I think you will take back the joy and experiences that come with attending conventions and being surrounded by people just as strange and wonderful and insane as you are. Mind you, some of them have never heard of soap, but they can make ramen in a coffee maker, so I guess they invested in other skills. In summary, Carrot Cake, slow exposure therapy by attending Lolita meetups with a friend, family member, or Lolita compatriot should help you slowly build up positive experiences to overwhelm the frackery that happened. And with enough time and patience, you should be able to convince your brain that wearing Lolita in public is a safe and fun thing to do, and the likelihood of running into another future inmate at federal prison is right up there with spontaneous combustion, and TikTok Lolitas buying from anywhere other than Amazon. Said TikTok Lolitas are now upset with me, a thing I would worry about if they had an attention span above that of a goldfish. I wish you the absolute best of luck as you progress in re-entering and enjoying the fashion again, Carrot Cake. I urge you once more to be incredibly patient and kind to yourself as you do so. Thank you again. That's where I'm going to end it tonight because I ran out of words. This has been Tyler. You've been watching the channel that has my fracking name on it. You've also been watching I'm Telling Tyler, our write-in series where you can ask me questions, tell me the latest tea, and so long as it's at least Lolita adjacent, you can send your tea and or queries to imtellingtyler@gmail.com. I'd like to thank my patrons for making all the flim-flam shim-shammery you just heard possible, and should you like to join their number, you can head over to patreon.com/lastweeklolitanews for more content that I don't recommend you watch in any capacity ever, no questions asked. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you next time.